the human being hasn't yet arrived at its last stage of development. That's the thesis with which Eckhart Tolle begins his book. His promise is that if we learn how to take the leap beyond our mind, beyond our ego, and learn to reconnect with the deeper dimension of who we are, then we're gonna be able to not only enjoy unending joy and peace, but that we will also have a better chance at saving the planet and the human species. Let me show you how you can do this. Joy is always in you. You don't have to go to Disneyland to have joy. No, it's here. All you need to know is learn to return to the moment. Why do we want to find the spiritual dimension in the first place? Because it's the only place where you can find real joy. Hello there, this is Alex again, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to another video. This time we have another great book, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. For those who know me, they probably know that Eckhart Tolle has been the most influential spiritual teacher in my life. I remember it quite clearly reading The Power of Now, which is Eckhart's first book, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point. Not today though. I remember quite clearly the first time that I read it, and it's interesting to think about how drastically my life has changed since I did that. Therefore, it is a pleasure to share this book with you today. The reason I chose this before The Power of Now is because I think this one's easier to digest. The Power of Now is a bit more dense, and I think this is a bit easier to the stomach. I was thinking as I was sitting here preparing to record the video, I was a bit nervous, as I always am before doing something like this. And I was trying to calm down, and a quote came into my head, which is one that I always use whenever I want to calm down, bring myself back to this moment. It's a quote by the Buddha, actually. It's a bit fun. It says, "There is, O monks," that's how the Buddha addresses his monks in the writings. "There is, O monks, an unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed. Were there not, O monks, this unborn, unoriginated, uncreative, unformed, there would be no escape from the world of the formed, originated, creative, formed." And this quote, to me at least, calms me down, reminds me of what's important, which is that deeper dimension that there exists to life. which the Buddha very cleverly describes as the unmanifested, the unformed, the uncreated. It's very clever because it tricks the mind. The mind, of course, always wants something to hold on to. And if instead of calling it the unmanifested, we call it God, then the mind clings to that. Okay, God, I need to find it. But that which we are looking for cannot be grasped, cannot be found, cannot be understood in the usual way that we generally understand or grasp things, which is conceptually. This thing that we're looking for, which we can also call the spiritual dimension, is very difficult to find, not because it's far away, but rather because it's so cleverly hidden. And in order to grasp it, you need to learn a different way of grasping, a different way of understanding that's not verbal. And I think maybe I can expand on what I said with what's here, because that's a central part of Eckhart's teaching, which is the mind's inability to grasp or to find the spiritual dimension. So he starts the second chapter actually by talking about words and language, and basically talking about our human fault of equating a name for understanding. In other words, when I am able to label something as plant or airplane or camera or hand or dog or cloud, then I convince myself that I know it already. And therefore, I don't need to continue investigating it. I know what that is, it's a plant, let me move to a different thing. And what this does, this has several repercussions in your life. One is you start losing touch with the mysteriousness of life, the beauty of nature around you. Nature becomes nothing more than a concept to you. You then disconnect yourself from its beauty. And you also start enclosing yourself in a prison almost, which is a prison that you have created for yourself, which has its bars made of thought. It's as if you put glasses on, which are tinted, very heavenly tinted, and after using them for a while, you forget that you are wearing incredibly tinted glasses. And of course, that has a drastic impact in your ability to enjoy the experience of being human. So he cautions us about language, telling us that if we want to find something worth finding in life, those things that are ultimately crucial to discover, such as your most deepest self, the nature of the universe, the meaning of life, all of those things require you to learn a different way of knowing, which is not conceptual, doesn't have anything to do with words. It reminds me of a poem by Walt Whitman where he talks about the leaves of grass and basically says that he could never possibly explain the mystery, the miracle that a leaf of grass is. So make sure to subscribe, because I'm sure I will do a video on that poem in the future. For now, let's stay with this. I wanted to tell you about the part where he talks about the evolution of the human being. By the way, for copyright reasons, I am not reading directly. I am just commenting, paraphrasing. This is a chapter that talks about the flowering of human consciousness, which basically addresses the question of human development. And the thesis here is that we have not yet arrived at the last stage of human development. Although we love to convince ourselves that we are the best species that there ever will be, guess what? We're not. And that's actually a good thing, because look around how much destruction is around you in terms of nature, in terms of destroying each other, in terms of political, social problems. Anyway, but he talks about the urgency of change. I believe, like he does, that any true change starts with you. That's why I am doing this channel, because I believe that the most primordial, the primary change is one inside, which is not about recreating yourself, but rather about discovering that deeper part to who you are that you never knew existed. And that's what Eckhart Tolle thinks is the next step in the development of human consciousness, which he says is a leap, jumping to a different level of being, to a different state of consciousness, we can say. Whereas before, we have the state of consciousness that is mind-dominated, where everything is conceptual, everything has a name. Your mind is always commenting on your life, on everything that's happening. Another characteristic of this state, the one that is ordinary to us, is that we live in the future, because our minds are always bringing our attention to the future, and we're not strong enough to fight it back, nor are we wise enough to even recognize that. All we know is we are anxious. Well, guess what? If you're anxious, it means your mind is in the future. If you are depressed, it means your mind is in the past, and you regret about what I did and I shouldn't have done, or what they did to me and I hate them and I will never ever trust a human being again. All of those things are part of this ordinary state of consciousness, which is a state where you are run by your mind and you don't even know it. Now, the first step in jumping to the other state of consciousness, which we can call a higher dimension of consciousness, or the spiritual dimension, is one where you are alert. The Tao Te Ching describes it beautifully as a warrior in enemy territory. So just imagine for a second, you are a warrior in enemy territory. What state of being are you in? I can assure you, you're not thinking about the past. You're probably not thinking about the future either. You are there, entirely there. Every single sound around you, the minutest sound of a leaf catches your attention. You're there. That's why so many people like to engage in extreme activities, extreme sports, because they force you to be in the present moment. And when you're in the present moment, it's such a relief psychologically, spiritually, because the burden of your mind is not there. In the same way, drugs are a similar sort of thing. They give you an instant relief from the burden of your mind and this voice that doesn't stop talking. But of course, the good news here is that you don't need extreme sports, you don't need drugs. You can learn to enter this dimension of consciousness on your own, anytime. And it starts with paying attention to whatever catches your consciousness right now. So he talks about enlightenment or salvation. He compares different spiritual traditions, basically to show that there is a core spiritual teaching that lies at the basis of every religion, every philosophy, every spiritual tradition. So he talks about this idea of awakening. And he basically says that any form, any life form on the planet can go through a process of enlightenment, of evolution. He talks about flowers as an example and tells how before, in the past, billions of years ago, there was only plants and all sort of vegetation was green or brown. But in one instant, suddenly, out of nowhere, flowers. One flower, then another flower, then billions of flowers. So he calls flowers the enlightened version of plants. And the same in the mineral dimension. Rocks are very dense, and suddenly, under extreme pressure of temperature and weight and force, this rock, which is already one of the densest forms on the planet, undergoes a transformation and becomes a crystal or a diamond. And in the form of a diamond, it becomes transparent. So in a similar way, the sort of enlightenment in the human being that we are trying to create is one where you become more transparent in that sense, which we can say is a lessening in the materiality. All of a sudden, your mind isn't that important. Your future problems aren't that important. Your past problems aren't that important. Your view of yourself, the entity that you're always trying to protect, and you're always so conscious of how well you're doing and trying to be better and trying to be stronger, trying to be quicker, trying to have more money, trying to be more wealthy. This is a dense mental thing too. We can call it the ego, is who you think you are. And in the normal state of consciousness, you are identified with who you think you are. Whereas in the spiritual dimension, the higher state of consciousness, you start realizing that you are so much more than your thoughts, and therefore so much more than the ego and the identity that you have in your mind. And whenever you learn to step outside of it and observe it, it starts lessening in density, which means you start taking it less seriously. Your mind still operates in the same way. It still tries to convince you to judge others because you're gonna feel better about yourself if you do that. Or complain about events because you're gonna feel better when you complain, because then you feel that you know better than others. Why do these guys run this like they do? It doesn't make sense. It's stupid. If we take the magnifying glass into that situation, we realize the ego loves to complain because it feels enlarged by doing that. Or gossiping is a similar sort of process. And you rise above identification with form, which is identification with your body, identification with your mind. You start realizing there's something more to you than your body. Right, so here he goes into what I would say it's the basis of Eckhart Tolle's teaching, which is around the question of how can we create this awakening for you? How can I create it? How can I be a more spiritual person? And he says it starts, an essential part of it is your recognition of that part of you that isn't enlightened yet. Your observation, your recognition of that part of you that remains trapped in the physical dimension of life. And that is your mind, your ego. So the most basic way, the most basic exercise, the most direct way into understanding how to take this leap into a higher level of development, a higher dimension of being, is your recognition of that part in you that is obscuring that spiritual dimension. And that is your mind, your ego. This chatter in your mind that is always talking, constantly, bringing your attention to the future, bringing your attention to the past, judging others, complaining. And the only way out of your mind is into the present moment. That's the only escape. What is the present moment? It starts with sense perceptions. Can you try to pay attention to sense perceptions around you? Sounds, sights, colors, smells, and any physical sensations. You can feel your body sitting here, and that already anchors you. Initially, your mind complains and says, "What? Feel my body?" Until suddenly, something goes, "Oh yes, I can feel it." If you can't, maybe close your eyes, that helps sometimes. And you realize, I can feel my body. And what you also realize is that in the moment, in the split second of feeling your body, there's no thought. And that is already the enlightened state. It's not a future goal. It's not something that we work towards in the future. No. It's something that you can only achieve now, in this instant. It's like walking on a tightrope. All of your attention is required. Walking on the razor's edge is how someone put it. That's the razor's edge of the now. And in the now, there's no thought. There is just sensation. And another thing that accompanies the now is a feeling of aliveness. Ever new joy is what Paramahansa Yogananda calls it. Which means it's a joy that's always fresh. Joy is always in you. You don't have to go to Disneyland to have joy. No, it's here. All you need to know is learn to return to the moment. Why do we want to find the spiritual dimension in the first place? Because it's the only place where you can find real joy. Nowhere else. Anything else is transitory. You might have plenty of fun if you go to Disneyland, but guess what? The experience is going to end at some point, and you're gonna be back on the Monday morning in your office, depressed. So, this is the hack to life, which is finding the present moment. And with it, you find your ability to be aware without thought. Usually, whenever we hear the idea of not thinking and stopping your mind, usually that's a scary idea because we are so identified with thought. And if we don't have thought, part of us convinces us, who are we? I don't want to let go of Alex, because without Alex, without the thoughts that accompany this entity, who am I? But I guess you're gonna have to figure it out for yourself. The benefit of finding this dimension of consciousness where you're still alive, you're still there, you're conscious, you are alert, but you're not thinking. That's what Eckhart Tolle calls the state of presence. And that's what he calls enlightenment. So, I hope this has been beneficial to you. If it has, it would mean the world to me if you can support my channel, leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel. The best way would actually be to start putting these things into practice. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time for another great book. Take good care. Bye bye.